All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If one thing I would suggest for those of you that are a little less used to using Zoom, if you see, like right now when I'm sharing a screen, I see 5 people down the right side of my screen. If you guys want to go to the top of that bar and hit the far left, it'll remove all of that so you can see most of the artwork. Does that make sense? And you can just see me speaking instead of about 5 other viewers. That way it won't impede with your view. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. I'm super glad you're here. Yes, sir.
Did you mean not Zoom smart, or did you just mean old people?
Oh, mostly just not Zoom smart.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. If you don't know me, my name is Hunter, and I am the preschool director at our preschool. And I also work with our children and our youth and our young adults. But before I went into church ministry, I actually went to college to work in a museum. And so I did my undergraduate work at Mary Baldwin College, where I did a double bachelor's in art history and studio art. And then I went on to VCU, where I did a postgraduate degree in art education. So when I was in high school, I started interning with the Chrysler Museum with Ann Dearsley Vernon in the education department. And so I thought that I was going to grow up and move to New York City and work in an art museum and be a curator. And I finished college and I realized that those curators make $19,000 a year. And I ended up at VCU to become an art teacher instead. So while I was at Mary Baldwin studying art history, I first became interested in Renaissance art, and that interest developed into the Northern Renaissance. And then after the Northern Renaissance, we have the Baroque period that comes after that. And I fell in love with the Dutch Baroque period, which we also call the Dutch Golden Age. And I went to Holland as part of a study abroad program my senior year. Or maybe it was my junior year. And I fell in love with Dutch painting of the Golden Age, and specifically still life painting. And we call that, in Dutch, it's called stilleven. So it's stilleven painting. And we're going to go ahead and get started. But the Dutch period is commonly referred to just as the 17th century, during the 1600s. And oh, my husband's sitting next to me. And the Dutch period had a huge, it was just a glorious period that came about from a result of hundreds of years of occupation of Spain running the country. And Spain was Catholic. Why don't you not sit here? This is making me nervous. Ian just sat down next to the couch. So Spain was a Catholic ruler, and Spain occupied Holland. And at the end of the 1500s, Spain got into war with Holland, and Holland revolted, and it's commonly referred to as the Dutch War of Independence. And so as a result of that, they had over 100 years of just opulence and a wonderful period known as the Dutch Golden Age. So this period runs from 1581 to 1672. All right, Shelby, how do I, oh, here we go. Next screen. Before we get started on this, I just want to mention the Protestant Reformation for you guys, because this is going to be really important as we move on with this conversation. For those of you that don't know, we know that the Protestant Reformation started in 1517 when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church. So fast forward to the 1600s and the Dutch and the Reformation. So what we have here is we have Spain and Holland at odds. Holland overthrew the Spanish government, which was highly Catholic. And when that happened, the Dutch folks that wanted to be Christian and not Catholic, the Reformed folks. So let me read this. The Protestant Reformation was the 16th century religious, political, intellectual, and cultural upheaval that splintered Catholic Europe, setting in place the structures and beliefs that would define the continent in the modern era. In Northern and Central Europe, reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII challenged the papal authority and questioned the Catholic Church's ability to define Christian practice. They argued for a religious and political redistribution of power into the hands of the Bible and pamphlet reading pastors and princes. The disruption triggered wars, persecution, and the so-called Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church's delayed but brutal response to the Protestants. So now we have the Protestant Reformation, which is the Catholic Church, as they grew more spiritual, more literate, and more educated. So our new religious orders, like the Jesuits, combined rigorous spirituality with a globally minded intellectualism, while mystics such as the Teresa of Avila injected new passion into the older orders. Inquisitions, both in Spain and in Rome, were organized to fight the threat of Protestant heresy. So we have the Protestant Reformation and the Counter-Protestantism and the Counter-Reformation happening. So what happened here was we have the revolt of 1568, and it was the revolt of 17 provinces and against Philip II of Spain, and it led to the 80 Years' War, also known as the Dutch War of Independence. So they became independent, and what happens here is down here, and if you look down south in the Spanish Netherlands, the yellow piece is where Spain managed to keep their property here. And then when the Dutch folks overturned the Spanish folks, those people fled up north to the dark area. Do you see that? And so now we have two areas known as Holland and Flanders. So Flanders is going to become what we know now as the north part of Belgium. And we've got Holland up here. And so now what we've got, Holland becomes Protestant, and Flanders, which we know as Belgium, stays Catholic. So we have, they left, they went north. And so for those of you that have been to Amsterdam, you know that Amsterdam is, a place of liberation. It's a place where people are accepted. And that started way back as early as the late 1500s when they all fled up north so that they could have their religious freedom. And so it created a culture of acceptance, both religiously and in other areas. So, and that's still pretty prominent today. So, what I want you to remember now is that the North is Protestant and the South, which we know as the Flanders back in the day, and Northern Belgium stays under Catholic rule. All right, so this is where it gets really interesting. So all these Protestants that left the Catholic rule down in the South and went up north for their freedom, they move up to the coastline, and they're kind of lower middle class at this time. And we've got fishermen, we've got farmers, we've got all kinds of folks. And they've got boats because they're on the coastline and they're sailing. And this is really, really interesting, folks. So we've got the birth of what they call the Dutch East India Company. And back in the day, they called it the VOC. And that's initials for the Dutch East India Company in Dutch. So I'll refer to it as the VOC, but Americans know it as the Dutch East India Company. And they were amazing. If you look at this map here, this is the very, very first, it's the very, very first, what we see as global exploration and foreign trade. And this is the very first use of this, like the stock market and a company being owned publicly. So the Dutch Trading Company, they start importing foreign objects from Asia and to pass around the European markets. And they first started importing silk and fabrics. And then they moved on to things like spices, where for like 20 years, they had a monopoly on all the spices all around the world. So the interesting thing here that ties into the artwork that we're going to be talking about tonight is this was a privately owned company where you see the East India companies like in France and in Great Britain, they're owned by the Catholic Church. And so this is a company that's owned by a bunch of people like you and me, and we're able to buy stock in it. And they're traveling around the world. They're collecting fabrics. They're selling that. They're mostly trading it for silver. And then it expands. They're going to the South Africa at Cape Town. They're getting teas. They're getting luxury goods. They're getting spices and porcelain. They're getting nutmeg, all kinds of stuff from all over the world. And they're getting richer and richer and richer. And so what's happening is these folks like you and me that have bought into this company are becoming regular people, and they're getting richer and richer and richer. So we have a rise of peasant folks. So before the Catholics, before the Dutch overturned the Catholics and they went up north to Holland, there was like 30,000 people in Amsterdam. And then after the Dutch fled up there by 1600s, I want to say there was like 200,000 people living in Amsterdam. And it was people that started fairly poor. And by the turn of the century, if they had invested in the VOC, they were loaded at this point. And I mean, they were loaded because they were part of this company. And the interesting thing is, to me, is that this is the foundation of all these publicly traded businesses that we see today, with folks that buy into stock markets and buy shares in companies. And so this was the very birth of that. So these folks went from regular folks to absolutely loaded. And you can see how they were going all over the world. They were bringing back stuff. They went from, lower class folks to very upper middle class folks. And not only did they bring spices and bring back things that made their life more opulent, but they also paid folks to do a lot of exploring, and so they commissioned explorers. So a lot of the stuff that you see with the cartography and maps from back in the day was thanks to the Dutchmen that had the money to commission. What do you call them? Explorers. So we're going to move on to the next one. All right. So although spices became, I said a little bit before, they started with textiles and silks, and then they got a 21-year monopoly on the spice trade, which is really what made them like absolutely become super loaded. So the spices totally kept the money rolling into the VOC. But one of the things that became a major hot commodity were these Nautilus shells, and they commonly became collected as kind of items that were status symbols, so to speak. And this is where I wanted to mention, I don't know how many of you have what we call a Curio Cabinet in their house. This is one of the places where they, got that term Curio Cabinet, and that's short for Curiosity Cabinet. And these Dutch folks that were becoming richer and richer would have these cabinets where they would collect, goods from all over the world that were considered kind of status symbols and items of curiosity. And they would load them into these cabinets that we now know as Curio Cabinets. And they would show them off as that status symbol to show folks that they were super, super wealthy. So the Nautilus, on the left, you see a painting of a still life with a Nautilus. And then on the right, you actually see an item where the Nautilus shell was, put together with sterling silver. And the sterling silver they were getting from North America primarily. Interestingly enough, I read something recently where, the Dutch came and explored a lot of the North Americas at the same time that the British were. And some of the Dutch explored and found these lands even prior to the British folks. But because the Dutch culture was so luxurious and so opulent, they couldn't find folks that were willing to stay and actually settle the land and live there, because life was just so good and it was so opulent and it was so over the top in Holland at the time that nobody was willing to leave for a long period of time. So moving along. So we've been calling this the Dutch Golden Age, but it's also known as the Dutch Baroque period. And I like to say, I love the Baroque period, and we always joke around saying, if it's not Baroque, don't fix it. And that's from a Disney movie, Beauty and the Beast. But the Dutch Baroque is very different than the Italian and the French Baroque. And here you see a famous French Baroque painter, Nicolas Poussin. And this is a very typical French or Italian Baroque piece. It's very dramatic. It's lots of lights and darks. We call that chiaroscuro. There's a lot of drama. And also still keep in mind the difference between the French and the Italian Baroque period and the Dutch Baroque period is that the French and the Italian were still ruled by the Catholics. And so we've got the Italian and the French Baroque folks still have a lot of artwork that is religious oriented because all their artwork was being commissioned by the Catholic Church. So if you want to compare the two, if you want to compare, the kind of the Southern Baroque, which is the French, the Italian, the Spanish, to the Dutch Baroque, the Southerns are going to be much more religiously oriented. It's going to be a lot of royal propaganda, especially in the French Baroque painters. You're going to see a lot of kings that are dressed up, a lot of those Louis kings you'll see in there. You'll see a lot of action, a lot of drama, a lot of chiaroscuro, which is a big word in artwork. If you look at the painting on the left, it's by a famous Baroque painter called Caravaggio, and he is noted for painting with chiaroscuro, which is light lights and dark dark. So you see that is shown pretty clearly there. Now, so also with the Italian and the French, they're the Counter-Reformation. So we've got the Reformation going in areas like Holland, where they're trying to become not Catholic. They want to become Protestant. And then we've got the Counter-Reformation happening in Italy and France and other areas like Spain, where they're trying to keep the Catholic Church going. So the Dutch Baroque period is very, very different than the Italian and the French Baroques because they're not at all into the Catholic Church. They're Protestant at this point. You don't see very much religious art at all. If you do see religious art, it's a lot of symbolic art, which we're going to be talking about tonight. In these still life paintings, you see a lot of landscapes, a lot of genre paintings, scenes of everyday life. And most of this artwork is commissioned by the nobles, the wealthy merchants, and the middle class. And so still typically our Italian and our French artwork is going to be bigger. It's going to be, designed for cathedrals and churches, and the Dutch stuff is going to be much smaller, and it's going to be intended to hang in people's houses like yours and mine. And so they're going to be on canvases and painted on wooden panels and so on and so forth. And so a result of that, y'all, is that a lot of the Dutch Baroque art has been lost. They say that there's really only between 1% to 5% of the Dutch Baroque art that it's even around for us to see anymore, because it was, small, it was hanging in people's houses. And a lot of what folks did was they'd paint something, they'd hang it on their wall. And then when they wanted something else, they would take the canvas to the artist, and they would have the artist paint on it again. So they lost a lot of paintings that way. So as we're coming out of the Italian Renaissance and the French academies, for those of you that are familiar with art history, there's a hierarchy. There's an importance in artwork. So we've got history paintings. Those are considered the absolute most important paintings. They're considered, the high class paintings. And that includes religious paintings, mythology paintings, allegory paintings. Those are the high class paintings. And as they go down, portrait paintings are still relatively highly valued. They're kind of still classy. And then as you go down to the bottom, we've got genre paintings. Those are scenes of everyday life. One of the most famous genre artists that you guys have heard of is Vermeer, and he's a Dutch painter. He's super well known for his genre artwork. And then as we go down to the bottom, we have landscapes, and then still life paintings are at the very, very bottom. So the Dutch the Dutch did, the Dutch really embraced those lower tiered paintings. You know, they really went for the genre paintings, the landscape paintings, and the still life paintings, and they really elevated those lower tier paintings into a much higher echelon. So here we have, I wanted to throw up some other Dutch art before we get going. You guys know Vermeer, he's super famous. Everybody's read The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Rembrandt is the most famous painter and printmaker of all of Holland. We've got Paulus Potter, who did animals and landscapes, Peter Bruegel the Elder, and Judith Leister down here. And so these are all pretty great representations of what Dutch art was looking like during the 1600s and the 17th century. So what we're going to be talking about tonight are still life paintings. And the still life paintings to me are so interesting because it reflects exactly what's going on in Holland as these paintings are being painted. So we've got 5 different kinds of still life paintings we're going to talk about. We have flower paintings, we have vanitas paintings, and vanitas means life is fleeting. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We have breakfast paintings, we have game paintings, and we have banquet paintings. So these are the 5 paintings, these are the 5 types of still life paintings that they concentrated on. And one of the interesting things too about the Dutch is Dutch painters aren't like my mom. My mom will sometimes paint, you know, a still life painting, and then maybe she'll paint a picture of Arlie, or then maybe she'll paint, you know, a landscape picture. In Holland at the time, you painted still lifes, and that's all you painted, and that's what you painted all the time. And not only would you paint a still life, you would focus on flowers. And a lot of, and if you painted flowers, that's all you painted, and you wouldn't be caught dead painting game paintings or vanitas paintings unless it had flowers in it. And so they really stuck with one thing and they wanted to perfect it. And so there wasn't a lot of cross pollination in the types of paintings that you were making as an artist. And another thing too, is that it also depended on where you lived in Holland. If you lived in Amsterdam or Utrecht or other areas, you would focus on flower painting. You know, the flower painters lived in those areas. So the area you lived in also would determine what kind of still life painter that you were. All right, moving on. So this is what we call a breakfast piece. So we're gonna fast forward, or we're gonna stop at 1600. So 1600 is kind of a good place to start at the beginning of the golden era. They're about 12 years out of the north of Holland, getting their freedom from the Catholics. So they're traveling a little bit. They're bringing back things. They're wealthy-ish. They're not as wealthy as they're going to be. The VOC hadn't totally exploded at this point. And this is a really great painting that's a typical of a breakfast piece, and it's by Peter Klaus. And this was painted at the beginning of the 1600s. And it's what makes this interesting and what makes it a breakfast piece is that it's very Dutch. So at this point, they're putting things in these breakfast pieces that are symbolic of Dutch life. And if you've been to Holland, you know they're big on pickled herring, you know they're big on cheese. So we see things here that are symbolic of Dutch life. They're monochromatic. They're not opulent at all at this point. And one of the neat things too is that the fish is symbolic of Dutch life, but it's also symbolic with the bread of the Eucharist, with the body and blood of Christ. So we're getting into symbolism here a little bit. You can see the realism is really impressive at this point. You can see the folds in the fabric. You can see the highlights in the glass. And so we've got symbolism happening with the body and blood of Christ. They're not going to be totally overt about their religion because they're not Catholic. They're more austere. They're reformed at this point. And then we're going to move to the next. Here's another breakfast piece right here. It's called Still Life with Cheese by Flores van Dyke. This is from 1615. And we have here another portrait of Dutch life. You have the cheese that are stacked up there. That's very reminiscent of Dutch culture. They're very well known for their cheese. You've got fruits here. So we're into 1615. And so those fruits, they're not grown in Holland. They're being brought back by the travels that are happening with the Dutch East India Company. So we're starting to show a little bit of wealth here. And they're painting this on here. It's like having a designer handbag. These things are being painted on there to show folks that these people have wealth. And another thing too is that they're painting them to kind of show, like, it almost looks like a breakfast. It's not all fixed up and you take your picture before you eat your Thanksgiving dinner. This almost looks like they've eaten part of it and they've walked off. And so we have some symbolism here with, you see the peel of the fruit going down the side. That's starting to be symbolic of the fact that life is fleeting and that we don't stick around forever. We have notes of wealth here. Let me see what else I've got. And the dairy, it says the dairy product on the dairy, it brings the devil. So there's some symbolism even with the cheese and having that on there. And if you've been to Europe, you see even this Belgian lace that's down there. That's probably coming from the north of Belgium too. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in here that is noteworthy. Oh, the olives were traded. And then at this point you see there's some Asian pottery or porcelain sitting in the middle. All of this stuff really, other than the cheese, has been brought from the far off Asian, the travels to Asia and India and all of those places. All right, this is a good picture because this is one of the female Dutch artists that we know about. Her name is Clara Peters, and she's actually the most well-known breakfast painter of the Dutch era. And so Clara Peters painted this in 1625. You see the hard crust, you see the bread there. The hard crust is symbolic of daily life and it's crumbling onto the table. The flowering artichoke and the beautiful red cherries reflect on a silver plate. Let me see. The cherry, I'm trying to see. Oh, you see the cherries there and you see the cherry pit. So one of those cherries has been eaten, and that's a gentle reminder of the impermanence of life. So you've got a lot of things happening here, but most of these things are fairly Dutch items still at this point. All right, this is kind of at the end of the breakfast period. So we're still, let me see when this painting, this is 1635. This is by Willem Klaus Heda. He's also a very, very well-known breakfast painter and Dutch still life painter of the time. This is called the Banquet Piece with mince pie. You see olives and lemons, and they're imported. Oysters with vinegar, seasoned salt, mince pies, all that stuff have come from the Near East and would have been reserved for festive occasions that were kind of like our versions of Christmas and Easter. So, all right, so we get to flowers. So many of you who have seen these Dutch still life paintings before know that the Dutch are, hold on a second. The Dutch are super well known for their flowers. You guys know that the Dutch are also famous for their tulips. So the tulip trade became super like big time in the 1600s. The tulips were introduced a little bit before the Dutch became super wealthy and the powerhouse of the trade industry. Let me see who they said. I want to say that they said that the tulips, they were a gift from the Sultan of Turkey in 1554 from the Ottoman Empire, and then they spread around to Holland, particularly Amsterdam. But around 1637, they hit the height of tulip mania. And I'm not kidding. I read something recently. It said tulips became such a status symbol, y'all, that a single tulip bulb sold for 10 times the annual income of a skilled crafts worker. So there's actually a neat book called Tulip Mania if you're interested in flowers and want to read more on the tulip industry. But tulips really became kind of an icon of Holland back in the 1600s because it was a sign of wealth. It was a symbol of wealth. The tulip mania kind of crashed. This was where art mimics life in modern times right now to me. That was kind of interesting. The tulip mania crashed. It crashed in 1637. The collapse started in Haarlem, in Holland during the bubonic plague. And what happened was folks weren't coming out to trade their bulbs. Let me find this piece. It says the tulip bulb could collapse. The tulip trade collapsed abruptly when buyers refused to show up at the routine bulb auctions. This may have been because Haarlem was then suffering from an outbreak of the bubonic plague. The existence of the plague may have helped to create a culture of fatalistic risk-taking that allowed the speculation to skyrocket in the first place. So the bubonic plague just killed this and just killed it overnight. But I thought it was crazy that one bulb went for 10 times the amount of somebody's annual income. So here you go here. So this is a very typical floral still life piece. And one of the interesting things that I'll point out to you with reference to that, if you look closely at it, these are all flowers that wouldn't bloom at the same time a year. If you look closely at it some more, the flowers aren't overlapping. If you took that flower arranging class, you see that flowers overlap, you see them sideways, they look much more organic. When you take a picture of a flower arrangement or you look at a flower arrangement, here they're straight on, they don't overlap. You see tulips, you see peonies, you see carnations, you see things that aren't blooming at the same time of year because they weren't out to make this look realistic. They were painting them for symbolic purposes. And let me tell you a few of some of these flowers and what these colors, I've gotten my pages out of order at this point. Hold on. Oh, here we go. So we've got lilies, obviously, are symbolic of the Virgin Mary. The white iris is a symbol of her purity. The rose is of Mary's love. Daisies were symbolic of charity. Buttercups meant that you were in an unmarried state. Sunflowers represented God's love or sometimes earthly love. Carnations, they were symbolic of the resurrection of Christ. I said before, lilies stood for purity. Irises stood for the Virgin Mary. And myrtles were shorthand for conversions. And then poppies depicted the Passion of Christ. So here, they weren't out to make something look totally realistic. They were out to paint things that were symbolic. And certainly, not only were they symbolic of, faith images or faith things, they were symbolic of wealth and status. And you can see that it was also pretty popular to put in, I want to say in this picture, you can see pictures of like a bumblebee and all of that. But if you look towards the bottom of this page, you see the flowers that are falling apart. And whenever you see flowers that are dying or a lemon peel that's peeled off, it's trying to tell you that life is fleeting and you die and things don't last forever. So that is that. All right, here we have another picture by a floral artist, still life with flowers, and this was painted in 1617. So then, so the flower pieces were painted during the entire course of the 16th century. The flower pieces were painted from 1600 to the end of the 1600s. Before we talked about flowers, we talked a little bit about the banquet pieces. The banquet pieces were painted during the early part of the 1600s. Remember, we talked about the fact that it reflects the Dutch life, and it starts to reflect the fact that they've got things and they've got commodities and they're trading. And I only have 10 minutes. Okay, here we've got vanitas paintings, and that's symbolic of that life is fleeting. So we've got skulls here that show that life is fleeting and that you're going to die. You've got flowers that are wilting. That's very symbolic of vanitas paintings. Vanitas paintings are being painted in the middle of the 1600s here. You've got bubbles. That's very symbolic of the fact that they're going to pop. Nothing sticks around less time than a bubble. So a bubble is super symbolic of the fact that life is fleeting. We've got another vanitas painting by Harman Steinvik. We've got, let me see here. We've got the books. The book is open. You've got things that are knocked over. You've got the skull there. You've got a candle that's being burnt down. All of this stuff is very symbolic of the fact that you're going to croak. Here's another last vanitas painting that I thought was interesting. My mom says that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move on now to banquet pieces. So we've got breakfast pieces at the beginning. We've got vanitas pieces where they're kind of figuring out that life is fleeting and that although they've got all this stuff that things are not permanent, they're going to croak. And then we move into their real era of opulence, and they're over the top at this point. And this is called banquet pieces. And the banquet pieces were painted from around like 1640 to the end of the 1600s. And so at this point, they're traveling all over the world. The middle class are loaded. They're all going to the yacht club. They've all got, you know, the best cars. They're all going to Turks and Caicos, so to speak. And that's what these pictures are supposed to reflect to you. You see that they've got the Persian rugs. You see that they've got fruit from other countries. Things are much more opulent. There's much more drama in painting, but you've still got that symbolism happening with these foreign fruits, the lemons that are being peeled to show that, you know, life is not permanent. We're not going to stick around forever. This fruit is going to die. It's going to wilt. It's going to die. This is by an artist called Wilhelm Kaff, who is a famous still life painter. So what we call banquet pieces are pronkstilleven, which means fancy still life. Here's another, although this looks a little bit more like a breakfast piece, this is still this is the banquet piece. And the reason that it is you've got oysters here. Even back in those days, oysters were a sign. They were an aphrodisiac. They had to travel to get the oysters. Did I tell you that this was painted by Peter Klaus? And this was 1643. So kind of when banquet pieces were becoming super in vogue. All right, I want to say this is the last banquet piece that we've got by Wilhelm Kaff. This is, no, we've got one more after this. You see here, there's the Nautilus Cup. So all this painting is this is a giant Louis Vuitton bag to hang on your wall so that your friends can see that not only do you, can you afford artwork, but you can afford those items that are in the artwork. You've got the Persian rugs, you've got the Nautilus cups, you've got, look at the Asian porcelain that you've got in the front. You've got the silver, you've got the fruits. And then here's another one. When you used to see the breakfast pieces with the fish during the banquet period, all of that is being replaced by more exotic stuff like lobsters there. Now, one thing that I want to point out is there's a lot of there's a lot of not great things that happened during the Dutch Golden Period. Kind of like during our period, you know, in the in the 1700s and the 1800s, when we were establishing the Americas, there's a lot of things not to be proud of. Here you have a still life. This is painted in 1680, so it's at the very height of the golden era, and you've got a slave that's featured in the very back of the painting, and that's you wouldn't put a person in a painting, you wouldn't put a white person in a painting, but they put black folks in paintings. They put the slaves in paintings because they were kind of considered part of the still life painting. And even folks that couldn't afford to have slaves, they'd pay to have slaves come over to paint, to have them in the painting, kind of as a sign of a status symbol that you could afford one to have in a piece of artwork. So a lot of horrible things happened when they traveled with the VOC. When they were traveling around and exploring, the Dutch Protestants weren't really, they didn't care about going off to foreign countries to evangelize and turn folks into Christians. But they went and they treated folks horribly. I mean, they raped, they pillaged, they did a lot of horrible things during this period of opulence. So there's a lot of, reflection, very similar to our period in the United States with slavery. There's a similar feeling with the Dutch during that golden period of, reparations and making things right, and where people were mistreated and treated horribly. My final kind that I want to show you, and I won't cover this for very long. The last type of still life painting was game paintings. And so you wouldn't see the animals alive. They were dead paintings, dead animals, and they would paint them, and they'd sometime mix them. You'd see this one had pictures. This had flowers painted in there, and they were studying nature. So, and it was also a sign of, it was a status symbol in the sense that folks could go off and they could hunt for sport, and they had leisure time to do that. Another thing that they did with game paintings is that they painted a lot of fish, because like I mentioned before, fish is a sign of Dutch culture, and it's also a symbol of, the body of Christ with the Eucharist here. And then this is a final game painting that we've got. So in conclusion, the Dutch Golden Period, it didn't really crash. It didn't fail. It just kind of wilted away. The Dutch were extremely effective at exploiting their wealth, and this gave them an advantage early on. At one point, they were the leaders in the world in trade and going around and collecting items. I mean, they were bigger than Spain. They were bigger than Britain. They were bigger than France for a long time. But in the end, the Netherlands was a country with such a limited population and a relatively uncentralized system of governance. So given these limitations, it was inevitable that the Dutch power would decline in comparison to other states like Germany and Britain and France. One of the things that I wanted to point out here at the end is, as I was looking at this now, I wrote my paper, my senior thesis in college was about the evolution of Dutch still life painting. And now I'm looking at it as a 44-year-old. I mean, I haven't really thought about this much, but as I'm looking at it as a 44-year-old, I see just a huge stark similarity to the opulence of life in the 1600s in Holland and what we see today. They're painting pictures, they're wanting to look opulent, they're wanting to look fancy. And we do that, on our Instagram posts. We do that with our celebrity culture. And I thought that there was a big parallel between the two for me. So if this interests you at all, I know it's as boring as all get out. But if for some reason you want to watch paint dry, these are three of my favorite books on Dutch culture in the Dutch Golden Age. The book on the left is called The Embarrassment of Riches by Simon Shama. And that is actually the first book that I ever read on Dutch the Dutch Golden Age when I was in college, and that's what got me into it and made me kind of fall in love with Dutch culture during the 1600s. And the other two books, the Cambridge Companion to the Dutch Golden Age and Art and Commerce in the Dutch Golden Age, are also good companion pieces if you're interested in learning more about Dutch culture. And there are some great podcasts out there as well that are interesting, that I am happy to recommend. So that is it. I'm done.
Great stuff here. Do you want to take your share screen off so we can see people again, maybe?
Hold on. Yeah, hold on.
We do have a few questions here. So, how did someone choose which type of painting they would do? Flowers, breakfast, game? Were they commissioned, or did they just do what they were good at?
Well, like I mentioned before, it would depend on where you lived. Like in certain towns, pods of painters only painted floral paintings, or certain artists only painted certain things. You'd go out and they had markets where you could buy paintings, but you could also have them commissioned to reflect the wealth that you had in your home.
Okay. And then someone asked, is the flower symbolism that you mentioned, was that universally known, or did the painter make that association?
It was universally known, and even a lot, like even in Italian Renaissance art, lilies are symbolic of the same thing.
Okay. Did the Dutch adopt those symbolisms, or did it originate with the Dutch? Do you know?
Some of them were adopted. Some, like certainly, lilies were something that, was kind of well known for that. But I don't know the answer to that, quite frankly. My guess is they kind of invented some of it, I would think. Mom, do you know the answer to that?
Well, I would say that it was Italian to begin with the Catholic Church, because a lot of it is much older, back into the 14th century.
But not all of those flowers would have a religious symbol attached to it.
Almost every single one that you mentioned in that one painting that was large, where they were all facing were exactly the same symbols that you would have found in those Madonna and Child, when, like the carnation, being the passion, and the tulips. I wrote on there, I don't know who can see the comments, but there is a movie, I think I saw it on Netflix, called Tulip Fever. It's a period piece. Yeah. And it's exactly about what you're talking about, and the tulips being traded and being worth, just unbelievable amounts of money, and worth more than gold. And it was really good. Whether it's still on Netflix, I don't know. You can probably...
there's a book, y'all, called Tulip Mania, and that's a really great book.
That's what the name of it was, Tulip Mania.
No, and so that was made out of a book, Mom.
No, that might have been no, I think it's Tulip Fever is what it was.
All right, any other questions?
Tracy wanted to know what your favorite painting was.
I think I like the Banquet Pieces, kind of the drama and the grandeur of it, and how it's, so reflective of their wealth and all. Those are my favorite.
Do you have a favorite Dutch artist?
Well, Jan Davids de Heem is probably the most well-known banquet painter. So I would say he was my favorite banquet painter, but I love Vermeer and I love Rembrandt, like everybody does. But as far as still life painters, it would be Jan Davids de Heem.
Those are all the questions in the chat. Did anyone have any questions for Hunter?
And now you know why I am in ministry work, because this is pretty darn boring.
Hunter, this is Valina. I have a question. You mentioned Curio Cabinets. So were they created during this time period as well?
No, I think that curio cabinets went back further back than the 1600s. I want to say, if Randy's on there, Randy, pull up your screen. I want to say curio cabinets were around before the 1600s, but they were real prevalent at the time during the Dutch period because it was a way to display all of their wares and stuff that they could afford to buy or travel to get. Mm-hmm. But I want to say they were around 100 or 200 years prior to that. But I think it's an interesting, you know, for folks to know where the term came from.
Absolutely. So people would display things that they had collected either at the market or traveling. Is that?
Like they were either traveling or things that they could afford to purchase that came from far off areas.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anybody, any other questions?
No.
Sometimes they commissioned paintings that had things in them so they could show that they were bougie enough to know what they even were.
Yeah.
Because not everybody would have known or seen a Nautilus shell, for instance. You know, to say, look, I even know what it is.
Mieko Ishibashi wants to know why I chose my thesis, and I would like to tell everybody because initially I wanted to go spend an entire, like I said before, I was mostly interested in the Northern Renaissance, and also I was interested in Italian Renaissance. So I thought that's what I was going to specialize in, and I wanted to go spend a semester in Florence, and my mother wouldn't let me do it. And so she sent me to the Low Countries instead. And I was so mad at her that I couldn't go to Italy. And I was like, I don't even know where the Low Countries are. Where are the Low Countries? And so that's when I went to Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. And that's when I fell in love with Dutch art. And that's where what led me to writing that thesis. Oh, another funny story about my thesis. I told this to the staff. So it was back in the day. So I went to college back before they even had, I didn't even have an email account the entire time I was in college. And so you had to go to your library and you had to say, look, I want these books. And they clearly didn't have these books at Mary Baldwin. And so they'd call around to this interlibrary loan system. And they found all these books for me at Washington and Lee, which is in Lexington. And if you've ever bought art books, you know they're like exorbitantly expensive. And they were, you know, whenever my book loans, whenever I'd have to buy books for classes, were always like super expensive because one book is $200. So I drove all the way to Lexington and collected these 12 books that I wrote my thesis on. Well, by the time I was done, I was so exhausted that I gave all these books to this girl that was a commuter student in Lexington and asked her to return them for me. And months went by or weeks went by or however long. And I got a phone call from the registrar's office or whoever was in charge of letting me graduate to say that you had a $2,500 library fine and that they weren't going to let me graduate. And I had given these books to a girl that lived in Lexington. I put them in a garbage bag. There were 12 of them. And she never bothered to take them back to the library. So they said, you're not going to be able to graduate. You owe $2,500 to the library. And this was in like 1998. So it was a ton of money. I mean, it's a ton of money now. And I remember having to call my parents and tell them I had this big old library fine. And I had to hunt that girl down. And a week later or so, the books just showed up in the book bin there. But I still had a huge library fine. That's my one and only memory of college. That's funny. But that's it, folks.
I had one random question that came to mind, Hunter. So like, what you've said, it sounds like some people would get these paintings commissioned and they'd have these items that were considered bougie and, you know, expensive, but they didn't necessarily have those items in their homes.
Yeah, no.
But how, like, in comparison, and you might not know the answer to this, but in comparison, like how much was this painting that they've had done to the items in the painting?
The paintings were very reasonably priced. I mean, folks could afford, I don't know that these artists were making loads and loads of money off of each of these paintings, but they were producing so many of them that the artists were fairly successful. But like I said before, I mean, the Italians, you know, further south, the weather was a little bit better. So they were still painting a lot of frescoes and on big walls like that. And a lot of the reason that the Dutch weren't doing that is because the weather wasn't great. And also, you know, they were painting for people's houses now and not for big churches. But so a lot of this artwork has been lost. Or maybe they're sitting at thrift stores. So thanks for coming out tonight, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
See y'all later.
Thank you, Hunter.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Hunter.